Spooky season is now in full swing, and amongst the ghouls and goblins, there's a question that's been lingering in the back of my mind and the depths of our Discord suggestion channel for quite a while. The question of who is the spookiest kiddo on campus? We've got a plethora of pranksters and world-ending threats walking about, so picking the most bone-chilling, terrifying individual from the pack is quite the task, because everyone finds different things scary. So while you may be used to the skeletons in your closet, others might find them unsettling. So how could I possibly, objectively, crown one of our NRC students the Spook King? The answer is, I can't. But I can subjectively rate them based on my own fear scale. So today we'll be considering each of the boys through the lenses of can they kill me and would they be willing to do so, with their special magic, outward demeanor, and inner motivations each receiving a score out of 13 to help us quantify these questions. Whoever has the highest score at the end will be crowned Spooky King and promptly served a restraining order. As always, we'll be talking about EN server story content, so consider this your spoiler warning. Now, since there are a lot of kiddos on campus, I want to narrow down our focus by eliminating those who don't really strike me as all that intimidating and/or individuals I just cannot envision being scary outside of harmless pranks. Therefore, Grim is being eliminated from the competition because he's really just a toddler. Does he have the potential to end the world? Probably, but at this point in time, he's just a little guy that eats everything, even rocks. And he doesn't really have much knowledge or memory of the world at large. He's our precious little schmuck, our annoying little guy, and annoying is not terrifying. Another little guy who's not making it through to the end is Ortho, who similarly to Grim is a world-ending threat, but he's just so nice about it that I can't really find him scary. Like, yes, he has cannons that could blast me off the face of this earth. Yes, he tried to take over the world with phantoms, and yes, he can be a bit quippy, but he's also usually only aggressive when Edie is being threatened in some way, so as long as you're chill about him and his brother, you're likely going to come out of the encounter unscathed. Speaking of Edie, he's also out of the consideration. I feel like this one's a bit of a curveball, but I cannot be bothered to be afraid of Edia's doxing my internet search history. Oh no, the world will see what fanfics I was reading. However, will I survive? Yes, Edia was also responsible for nearly ending the world, and yes, he could crash the entire world's economy if he wanted to, but I'm just not that intimidated by him. I'm also taking Silver out of the competition too, which probably doesn't need to be explained because he's just such a soft and earnest boy. I really don't see how anyone could be intimidated by him outside of maybe his serious expression, I guess. I'm sure Lilia taught him some spooky faces, but even when Silver is serious, I just find his expression more goofy than anything else. So, not a spook to be found here. Apple, likewise, is being taken out of the competition because he's just not as intimidating as some other folks. He's certainly got power behind him, he knows how to scuffle, and he even craves the scuffle. But so does every NRC student, so that alone doesn't make him especially scary. In a lot of ways, Apple reminds me of Scrappy Doo, and I just cannot be afraid of either of them. Deuce is in a similar boat because while he's also a scuffler, he's trying so hard to be better, and that gives him so many unspooky points, it completely outweighs the terrifying potential of his special magic. Double Down is actually quite spooky, and in the right hands, it could even be catastrophic. But it can only be weaponized against someone who's already aggressive, specifically with magic, so this terror is confined and not enough reduced to make the full list. Sebek, Little Becky, is also not going to be considered because I always just found him unbearably annoying with his loudness and his human talk, and while I know he could break every bone in my body if he wanted to, I think I'd be killed by the shouting match much earlier, and with such a relatively painless death on the table, I just cannot be afraid of him. I don't really know why he's not as scary as he probably should be. To me, he's just Little Becky. The stream hydration game really made him benign to me, so sorry, Sebek, you're out. Ruggy Bucci is also out because I want to give this boy all of the donuts in the world. He's just such a hard-working sweetie pie. I literally cannot be afraid of him despite his special magic having massive consequences. I just like this kid too much, and I feel like up until Leona asked him to do the stampede thing, he was really only liable for misdemeanors with his special magic, and like, that's valid enough, I guess. Ruggy just brings a smile to my face, and that's not what we're looking for today. Jack does scare me because jock, but also, he's a goody two-shoes who's in bed by 10 p.m., so like, how scary can he really be? Technically, he is a werewolf, kind of, so he does get put in the famous movie monsters box, but he's a lot more in control of his transformation and actions, so he's not quite as threatening. Like, sure, I wouldn't want to stumble across him in the middle of the woods at night if I didn't know that it was him, but I don't think bear in the woods is the caliber of threat that we're looking for today, so Jack's getting passed over as well. And finally, to no one's surprise, Colleen is also out of the consideration. I don't think there is a case I could make for this guy to be threatening in the way that I am at least quantifying here. He really doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would ever try to seriously injure anyone, at least on purpose. And while he can be a little pushy, he's not the worst. So, unfortunately for Kaleem, he is just not spooky enough to be considered here. That leaves 13 unlucky contestants for our subjective spooky consideration, who are in no particular order: Lilia, Riddle, Malleus, Leona, Kiddo, Rook, Trey, Vil, Azul, Jade, Ace, Floyd, and Jamil. Now, it is finally time to rate our spooky boys, starting with Riddle. From a special magic perspective, Riddle is touted as being very dangerous, given that the collars he uses completely cut off a mage from their magic. This is considered similar to or the same as losing your actual head, and because of this, it is reasonable that most folks are scared of Riddle, particularly the Heartstable freshmen. As someone without magic, this spell is basically a huge inconvenience for me, but it's not actually all that terrifying. I do think I'd have trouble sleeping, which would be the scariest thing about this collar, but that's just a normal night for me regardless. I cannot sleep to save my life, so I'm really not all that impressed. However, in the world of Twist, this is touted as being very catastrophic, and I think the spell can even be likened to the Fire Lotus Crisis of Glorious Masquerade, because the Fire Lotuses are essentially permanent Riddle collars that cannot be dispelled. And we're all supposed to fear for the lives of the boys in that event because of their magic-destroying properties, so I guess Riddle's collars, by extension, also evoke some sort of fear. Therefore, by virtue of my love for Glorious Masquerade and in recognition of the other students' fear, I'm going to give this spell, Off With Your Head, a solid 7 out of 13. It's kind of middle of the road for me, since I can see how it would be scary, but it's not personally scary. So I'm still going to give it credit for its importance in the story and overall world, but that's about as much as it's going to get here. Riddle's outward demeanor, though, is a bit more impactful, but just by a bit. There really isn't anything about Riddle's outward appearance on the surface that's spooky. He's short compared to me, and he acts like he's very prim and proper in most instances, so he doesn't come across as particularly intimidating. And since I don't have magic, I also don't have to compete with him in that realm, which takes a lot of the pressure off interactions with him, and by extension, the rest of the cast. Because of these things, I wouldn't be scared of Riddle during most interactions. He's not exactly the most approachable per se, but he's not intimidating or standoffish either. And if I was approaching him on official business, he'd be rather kind about the whole ordeal, I'm sure. But when Riddle gets mad, it is an entirely different situation. Red in the face, shouting, completely unable to be reasoned with. That scares me. I don't think Riddle's a complete loose cannon, so at least his outbursts would be somewhat predictable. But as someone who's very scared of being scolded, I would become a limp noodle and freeze up immediately. While I understand on a conceptual level where Riddle's rage comes from, and most of the time he's angry out of concern, and these outbursts do add some comedy to certain story beats, I, personally, just would have such a deep discomfort whenever they arose, and it makes me just wary enough of Riddle to give him some extra points here. Like, if we were hypothetically in a slasher fic with Riddle as the villain, I would be out immediately. All he would have to do was scream to me about my homework not being done, and I'd just be sitting there, frozen, in place, despite knowing full well I've been out of school for years, and my goose would be thoroughly fried. With these unsettled feelings, I'm going to be giving Riddle an 8 here, just because when he pops off, it's a sight to behold. On the whole, he's more like a 2. Strict, sure, but otherwise just a teenager. However, angry Riddle is absolutely an 8, so that's what I'm going to be sticking to for his scoring. Now, for Riddle's inner motivations, and for this, there isn't really a way for me to spin him as being particularly fright-inducing. Sure, his outbursts are scary, but at his core, his motivations for doing so are mostly to keep others out of trouble or out of perceived trouble. There might be a bit of pride in none of his students flunking out of school after he showed up, but even with that, his focus is on others and has altruistic overtones. So I'm just gonna give him a 2 here. Even if he was absorbed in his own ego, the overall effects of his actions are positive, and post-book 1, he's been healing bit by bit and being less tyranny in his care, which has been good for everyone, so there's nothing to be scared of in that regard. I suppose I could do a deep analysis of his overblot reasoning and the resolution of those feelings in Book 7, but we've got 12 other folks to get through, so TLDR, Riddle learned that to be feared is to be loved, so the way that he shows concern is to inspire fear in other folks. His intentions have always been out of concern, but it's the way that he communicates it that's not productive. But that's the difference between this and the previous categories, as someone's outward appearance can be counter to their internal motivations. Since Riddle's inner world is focused on concern and growth, it's not scary in the slightest to the outside observer. Sure, the misconstrued love is, but I don't know, I just can't fault him, so 2 it is. This means that Riddle receives a total of 17 spooky points. So, Trey, Mr. Average. At first, I didn't really think his special magic was all that special. The way the Doodle suit is introduced in Book 1 makes it seem weak, and even when Trey transmutes the rose bushes into playing cards during that final confrontation, it doesn't really feel dangerous. I'm not sure why I was convinced that the transformation was limited to relatively safe things, but I was for a long time. However, Book 7 has completely changed my perspective of not only Trey, but this spell. Because what do you mean he turned the hedge maze into a literal Saw movie trap? What do you mean, Trey? I get that this was life or death, but the thought of hundreds of goopy caters being cut up by leaves as they try to reach Trey, all while he's throwing out minor spells to slow them down or obliterate them, is haunting. Just the metal hedge leaves alone are enough to make my skin crawl, let alone the goopy gore that was likely unleashed. And I think I would be forever afraid of the spell if I happened to witness that in real time. Trey could wreak havoc if he truly wished to, because he could change anything benign into something terrifying in the same way he took terrifying things and made them benign. And my brain just cannot get over it at this point. You could be sipping on your chicken noodle soup, and instead of changing the flavor, Trey could just change it into spiders. You could be tying your shoelaces and he could turn them into snakes. Such things are a very Halloween move, but he could also go further like he did in Book 7 and create monstrous traps or terribly dangerous environments if he so chose to. I have never been more grateful that this kid chooses actively to be as normal and unassuming as possible. Trey, please, for the love of all that is good in the world, keep being boring, I beg you. Accordingly, he's going to get a full 13 points in this category. He's just got so much potential to be terrifying with this magic, I do not even want to be on his bad side at all. However, that doesn't seem like too much of an issue because Trey just likes to fall into the background. He blends in as much as possible and tries to be as normal as possible, so from an outward demeanor perspective, he's relatively safe. As Hartslabel's big brother, he comes across as particularly calm and level-headed, which also allows him to act as a shoulder to cry on for students. He's not entirely soft, as he makes the freshmen eat their disaster of a cake in his vignette, but they also were already at fault for doubting Trey's skills and habits, so really this is just Trey sticking up for himself. In his other related story bits, the guy is giving folks like Jade the benefit of the doubt, he's downplaying his talents as we can see in his labware vignette, and just doing the bare minimum most of the time like in his PE vignette. By all accounts, Trey's demeanor is the least spooky thing about him, and yet there is an occasion where this perfectly beige facade he puts up crumbles ever so slightly. A time where he is very strict and very stern. a time where an evil smirk graces his face and leaves all around him helpless to the whims of toothbrushing. If dental hygiene is being threatened, Trey is threatening those directly responsible. And in these moments, he is extremely scary. It's more like a parent scolding their child kind of scary, which in this specific instance isn't something that I'd run into since I brush my teeth very well. Thank you very much. But for these poor unfortunate souls that had to deal with him and his Soom, fate was much grimmer. Because of this aspect of Trey, I'm boosting his demeanor score up from 1 to 3. A perfectly fine number for a Clover, no? When it comes to Trey's inner motivations, though, I just do not trust him, and I cannot articulate why, besides critiquing him for being selfish, I guess, which really isn't saying very much given the environment of NRC. In the grand scheme of things, it is not as much of a crime as I've made it out to be in the tier list video, but it does unsettle me that Trey puts on this normal facade specifically to escape being responsible for things. The act of putting on this mask almost makes him diabolical because we can see that when he's alone, he's actually kind of cold and calculating. And that side of him is not only classically NRC, but also a bit intimidating, no? I feel like that side of Trey has always been there, but you only get to glimpse it when he lets the mask fall ever so slightly, like during the Soom sitting toothbrushing and his dorm vignette. It's subtle, but it's there, and it feels like Trey tries really hard to hide it so that he doesn't appear threatening. And that is more scary to me than him actively being threatening. I don't know if any of his malice is actually there, or if my mind completely fabricated it because, again, metal leaves and goop cater, but if it is there, I think his deliberate and desperate efforts to hide it make him almost less trustworthy than some of the more outwardly sadistic characters, because there's this underlying threat that has no warning. And for it, I'm going to give Trey an 8 here. It's a conspiratorial 8, but it is an 8 nonetheless. That brings Trey to the grand total of 23 spooky points. When it comes to Cater and to Split Card, I think they're both decently scary. I mean, you gotta admit this spell's got huge haunted house potential. You enter the decrepit, crumbling villa after winning it in a sweepstakes. Look around the foyer only to find a skeleton waiting upon the stairs to take the last picture of you alive. Because this house is going to be your final resting place. You try to run out the front door, but it's locked, and so comes the running around the house being chased by Cater and his clones. Infinite possible enemies with infinite paths, all trying to predict where you're going to go and catch you off guard. Or, in a more traditional sense, Cater can dress up his other selves on a predetermined route, so every time that you think you're safe, you encounter yet another monster, like a classical haunted house setup. These possibilities are more thrilling than anything else, but from a bodily injury perspective, Split Card is rather low. Sure, Cater can have a gang of clones fight you, which would be unfortunate, but there is a limit to the amount of manpower he can create, or at least to the amount of available magic he has left to do other things. The real issue here, at least for me, is that my object permanence is very shaky, and I don't trust anyone or anything. So every time I'd encounter Cater, I'd have this little voice in the back of my mind that would say, that might not actually be Cater. Is he the real one or a clone? Is he actually here talking with me, or will the real Cater have no knowledge of this conversation? Will I ever even meet the real Cater? Am I even real? Does this conversation, nay, reality, exist? Are we all part of a simulation? It is a full-blown existential crisis that I do not have time for. This is probably the real hidden terror in Cater's clones, all of the questions that they pose about reality and existence and what it means to be real. I'm going to give this psychological conundrum an 8 because these questions are scary, but I also feel like they're a little over-asked, and there are likely worse questions to be asking yourself, so score's a bit above average. Outwardly, though, Cater's not really all that scary. He's an extroverted, bubbly, emotionally aware guy who typically knows what to say and when to say it. However, he does sometimes come across as a bit fake because of this, as if his kindness is just a facade to keep you from looking in too deep, and that can be unnerving. There are also some instances where Cater is teasing or potentially teasing, where he makes this sus face, and during these moments he feels much more like a threat to me. For some reason, this single expression, despite being funny in context, makes my skin crawl a little. So depending on what Cater says at that moment, I may squint my eyes in judgmental horror. Outside of this, Cater's just a dude and doesn't really gain very many spooky points. He's just a kiddo with somewhat forced charisma and a bit of a flirting streak. That's not all that scary, and considering who he hangs around, he's really not all that threatening. He's not a wallflower, per se, but he's also not going to throw you into the depths of social interaction, so I don't know, maybe a 5? The sus face does make Cater scary. Like, it is very unnerving whenever his expression shifts to this, but outside of that, there's not a terrible bone in his body. Even his angry face doesn't scare me, so yeah, 5 seems fair for the susness. On the inside, though, I think Cater's not a threat at all. I don't detect any malice in his intentions, and that might be in part due to the air of sadness he seems to have, or perhaps because of his emotional intelligence. Cater knows exactly what to say to get everyone on the same page to resolve their conflicts, and with a little extra trust, he can do great things, like convince Ace to wake up. Sometimes his actions seem a little bit sus, but there's always some sort of underlying motivation that never comes across as selfish or ill-intentioned. Him helping Ace was a little harsh, but it wasn't uncalled for. His actions in the Firelit Sky event seek to make sure that Najma's included when she's around, and then to ensure the group is having fun later. During Playful Land, he's a model chaperone, and even in Book 1, distracting the freshmen by having them paint roses for him doubled as him getting free labor, while also keeping the kiddos out of trouble. Because they were not prepared to actually face Riddle in that specific instance. So, sure, him getting them to paint the roses for him isn't exactly the most honest of activities, but it does still hold a certain level of care that I think reflects the whole of Cater's internal motivations well. He is keeping others safe so that he in turn can also be safe, because if they're cared for, they won't cause him any problems, right? There's absolutely a part of this mentality that is Cater just trying to keep his head above water, I think, and it's likely more survival-based given his sisters than it would be any genuine altruism. In truth, this is probably actually exactly what Trey is also doing with his normal thing, but my brain refuses to let me give Trey a pass for some reason, so Cater is going to take all of Trey's hypothetical negative points into his score, bringing it down to 2 for this category. I really just cannot be afraid of Cater's motivations, and maybe it truly is just because he's so self-aware and emotionally aware. I don't know, I'm just primed to trust him no matter what Leona says, and it may be a fatal mistake on my end, but I can't really be bothered to care. Therefore, Cater is getting a big grand total of 15 spooky points. AC, you were holding out on us, bud. I wasn't sure you were gonna get a special magic in the main story at all with how long it was taking you, but you did, and it's cataclysmic. What do you mean Ace can imitate anyone else's magic? What do you mean he can literally yoink and yeet? We sure we want to give this to Ace of all people? He's surely not that bad, but the door has been opened to infinite shenanigans, and some of those are absolutely life-threatening. Ace can reasonably mimic anyone else's magic on campus, including, but perhaps not limited to, Riddle, Trey, Leona, Malleus, even Edea. Ace can open the gate to the underworld and start another apocalypse. Ace can start another apocalypse. 13 points, full marks. I don't trust this kid at all. I think Twisted Wonderland is doomed if he ever gets some real motivation behind him. However, I am delighted to think that whenever he runs into Ernesto next, Ernesto is going to try to get his revenge, and Ace is just going to yoink and yeet his special magic at him. Tell Ernesto that his life is just so fun and that he should just get over it, and then Ernesto will agree with Ace momentarily to Ernesto's almost immediate horror as he recognizes what's going on. That, I think, is worth the potential world-ending capabilities of Joker's Wild, but it is still getting full marks here because of those world-ending capabilities. In truth, I do think that the limitation of the spell is that Ace actually has to figure out the mechanics behind the spells that he is grabbing, and he probably has to grab them when they are being cast. So I don't think it is super simple in mimicry in that way. But like his card tricks, if he's able to understand those mechanics, and he's able to yoink the spell, he's going to be able to then use it, which is wild. Because of these limitations, he likely won't be able to actually copy Malleus or actually copy Edea. But if Ace were to put his mind to it and be in the right place at the right time, he could unleash so much damage. It is still a terrifying possibility. Aside from his special magic, Ace is not threatening in the slightest. In fact, I'm just going to group his outward and inward motivations here into one section because they're both just getting ones. That's just what it is. Ace puts on airs a lot and has a bit of bravado, but it's typical teenage cocky bravado, which is not anything special or particularly intimidating, especially to me at my age. Like, sure, he can be a bit of an ass, but I can see right through it, and I know it's just because he's scared. There's a lot of big fish at NRC, so Ace tries to establish dominance quickly, not necessarily because he believes himself inherently worthy of being on top, but because he's scared of being pummeled to the bottom. He's also a bit shy with his emotions, and expressing them genuinely is a bit hard, which might have a bit to do with his fear-induced laziness. I just don't have it within me to be scared of Ace at all. He is just a kid who may end the world with his magic, but otherwise is just a kid. So he is getting a total of 15 spooky points here for his efforts. Leona, though, is Thanos, and he can snap away anyone's existence at the drop of a hat with King's Roar if he was maniacal like that. So he is getting an immediate 13 spookies. This spell has such widespread destructive power, and I am honestly shocked that Leona's retainers put him down because of it. They may have themselves been scared, but there is so much potential in something like this, both bad and good, and I think Leona has the wherewithal to use it mainly for good. Of course, he has his moments, but those were under duress or to intimidate his dormmates because they were not playing nice, but not necessarily meant to consciously maim anyone or seriously injure them or, God forbid, kill, except that one time. Yet the possibility of those three things remains, and I don't doubt for a second that when faced with an actual threat, Leona would use this spell effectively. You know, like in Book 7, in Riddle's Dream, when he dusts the card soldiers left and right. Those goop boys could have been real boys in an alternate scenario, yet they'd return to dust all the same. Truly a 13 out of 13 moment. From a demeanor perspective, Leona isn't as threatening, but he is absolutely intimidating. He carries himself with an unbothered air and has the swagger of someone who knows they have the power to prove themselves if necessary, but they're not going to go out of their way to do so. When we first meet him in the botanical garden after stepping on his tail, my first thought was, who is this guy and why is he blaming us for his mistake? Get a grip. And then my second thought almost immediately after that was, oh, we are not getting out of this alive. Thank the Lord for Ruggy. I have no idea what we would have done without that kid. Truly a saint. But the point remains that Leona gets established as a character with weight very early on. Even in Book 2, he has an air of power about him that's not utilized well by the writing, but it is still there. If you have some value, then Leona's going to tolerate you, but if you don't, he's not even going to bother. Either way, though, he's not going to be particularly polite about letting you know where you stand. Inconveniencing him means there's going to be hell to pay. However, your saving grace is that Leona is also lazy. So if you're able to bite back in any way that doesn't directly threaten his power, you might end up let off the hook. Sure, he can be a bit quippy, but in the face of someone like Vil, for instance, Leona can only get so far with his demeanor. And if we look at how he subtly cares for his dormmates and those he holds dear, the cold, unapproachable lion begins to melt a little. He'll still bite your head off if you test him, but he's not really all that bad put together. So he's gonna get a 7 for his intimidating stature. Inside, though, he is a conflicted, sad boy who truly genuinely cares but doesn't know how to express it and or has convinced himself that doing so is meaningless. That's sad, not scary, and I really cannot be afraid of him in this way. Leona has internalized a lot of things, I think, that have resulted in him being the way that he is, particularly with his laziness, and it just doesn't quite hit the right way to be legitimately terrifying. There's no bite to it because the fangs are focused on himself, not other people. And when pushed, they might switch targets, but on the whole, his thoughts are only really a threat to himself. Now, that doesn't mean that Leona will not manipulate people for his own benefit. That is actually a specialty of his, and depending on who you are talking to, his victims might not even know they're getting played like a fiddle like Deuce. This is a bit spooky, a bit scary, and for it, his motivations are getting a 3. He really does care, he just hides it, and when he needs to be manipulative, he will be. But none of this malice is personal. It's just business. Honestly, it's really as simple as that. And while it probably should strike more fear into my heart than it does, I just can't be spooked by the sad lion in the same way as some other people. So Leona is finishing his part in this competition with 23 spooky points. On to Azul, who wants you to sign the scroll and hand over your soul to make a deal. This signature spell is life-threatening in the abstract, with the specific conditions of the contract dictating the fear level. In general, Azul's ability to take something in exchange for another thing is not terrifying, conceptually. Everyone does this every day in some way or another. Buying groceries is an exchange of money for food. Posting in a blog forum and hoping for feedback is giving your thoughts in exchange for someone else's. An eye for an eye, so to speak, and NRC is the perfect environment for this type of thinking to be ordinary in extraordinary circumstances. Azul knows this, and being the little capitalist icon he is, profits from it. His unique magic allows students to enter exchanges that seem profitable to them on the surface, but somehow always end up benefiting Azul the most. Sometimes it's as benign as a few highly toxic herbs, or as terrifying as indentured servitude. There's a bit of mundane fear in signing up for something you didn't fully understand, but this fear isn't all that impressive since it still exists in so many other things, like buying a car, getting a loan, all sorts of normal things. Where Azul's magic takes a terrifying turn is in the enforcement of the contract via magic. The Book 3 anemones cannot walk away, and in certain instances, they cannot even fight back. They got turned into puppets before turning into puppets was cool, and that loss of autonomy, along with the dimming hope of being able to ever escape this fate, that is where the terror begins, and that is why Azul is getting an 11 here. I don't think it's quite as scary as some of the other aforementioned magics, since you really do walk into this yourself. You do have a choice in the matter, but the consequences can be dire, and depending on the exact circumstances, you can be in it really deep. In order to lure in unsuspecting victims, customers, Azul puts on the perfect businessman front. He's polite, he's nice, he even wears a suit and bow tie, and he's always aware of how he's being perceived by others, which lets him shift interactions in his favor. His smile will adapt to whoever it's shown to, his words will twist themselves around to ensure that they're pleasing, and as long as you don't look too closely at this mask, there's nothing to fear. His underlying intentions don't matter because Azul's just oh so sincere. However, there are times when interacting with him feels fake. It is rather jarring to come to that realization after you've already been lulled into a false sense of security, and this adds to his spook factor, but only slightly. I personally think Azul is delightful, but I am always wary of his words and his placation because there's always an undertone even if it's not obvious, which creates distrust. It's that slow burn horror where you know something is off, but you don't know what, where you decide to rationalize your gut instinct instead of run away, and it's all thanks to the impeccable persona Azul's learned to put on, and for it, he's getting a 5. Internally, though, it's a completely different story. Azul is majorly powered by spite, and many of his actions reflect this. The entirety of Book 3 happens because he so desperately wants to expunge his past in favor of the persona he's created, so he never has to feel that same pain again, so he never gets looked down upon, so that he can spite all of those who ever ridiculed him by rising so far above them that he can hardly be touched. Even in smaller matters like cooking, the boy's determination is fueled by that same fire. As he himself states, he's participating in the culinary crucible so that his subordinates won't have a leg to stand on against him after they criticized his criticism of their cooking. Fight itself is an incredibly motivating force, and I personally cannot blame Azul for using it in this way. It's a much healthier outlet, so to speak, than wallowing away in sorrow, so there is a level of respect I have to give him here. However, Azul's specific brand of spite is not meant only to propel him forward, but to lash out at those who threaten him, which makes it dangerous and, to me, downright terrifying. It's survival-based, but it goes beyond that need frequently, and for it, Azul's going to get an 11 here. It is just so potent and poignant that I can't help but feel intimidated by it, and the score therefore reflects that fear. But this also means that Azul's racked up a total of 27 spooky points. It is time to move on to Jade, Mr. Mushroom Guy, a guy who can also force the truth out of you with his special magic, Shock the Heart. This spell compels you to answer any question Jade asks you truthfully, for as long as the spell is effective. On the surface, it's not all that terrifying unless you have secrets to hide, and you also have to be in a certain state of mind for it to be effective anyways, so certain individuals like Azul are more or less immune to it. Shock the Heart is also nerfed heavily by its single-use criteria too, so if Jade wastes it on you just to confirm something he already knows, then you can never be affected by it again. If Jade is to be believed. But in any case, I think on the base level, this spell is as terrifying as the secrets that you hold and Jade's determination to learn them. For someone like me, this should be a rather benign spell, because if Edia's hacking abilities and search history exposing tendencies don't scare me, what could Jade possibly do differently that would make this magic scary? Psychological torture. Something that he assuredly doesn't take pleasure in, he says, with that sus smile. And if given the chance, he'd make me reveal who my actual favorite Leech twin is. And if those factors combined isn't worth a 9, then I don't know what is. Outwardly, though, Jade falls into the background much more than his compatriots, and that is by design. In many ways, he's similar to Azul, being nice, polite, wearing a suit and a bow tie. But he doesn't shine in the spotlight, try to garner favor, or overextend himself to seal a business deal. For all intents and purposes, Jade is there to be of service to whatever purpose or person needs him. He stays quiet and observes, offering a helping hand when needed and memorizing all sorts of information to assist as best he can. Unlike Azul, though, the mask isn't really a mask here, at least not in the same way. Jade seems to enjoy being this way. He is self-admittedly restrained, and whenever he is helping, he's also somehow gaining something. However, unless you can see into his motivations, you'd never know for a second that the root of his helpfulness is amusement. Neither Floyd nor Jade do anything simply because they were told to, and in Jade's case, gathering information on others, being the quiet observer, being the gentleman, provides him with plentiful entertainment. The whole of his demeanor is meant to shock you. It is meant to put you so at ease that even the slightest comment can unnerve you, and it's all for Jade's amusement. Obtaining that exclusive heal is just the price he has to pay for his own satisfaction, and you'd never be the wiser under normal circumstances. This makes him incredibly dangerous, more so than Azul, because the line between the mask and wearer is much thinner, which is what got him an 8 here. Internally, Jade is motivated mostly by amusement, as I've touched on, but he also has a bit of sadism, which creates a terrifying internal life. I do not doubt for a second that Jade takes great pleasure in knowing the truth while those he's interacting with are none the wiser. There is no way Jade's vignette story happened without Jade being immensely satisfied by being able to so excellently and subtly manipulate the situation to ensure Vil promoted the mystery drink on his socials, and Vil at the time seemingly being unaware of this underlying goal. I don't believe for a second that Jade doesn't take pleasure in breaking people down bit by bit psychologically so that his special magic and potentially other persuasive offerings take root. Yet he says it so casually, and folks brush it off as an eccentricity, which I think also likely amuses him. There is also a bit of a superiority complex in Jade, I think, based not only on this, but the way that he sees Floyd and Azul in his dream. Malleus may have created the circumstances, but I don't think he manipulated too much in terms of the goop characters, except for when they're threatened. This perception seems to be rooted much more in the dreamer, and just look at Floyd. Look at him and how he acts eating those crabs, which the real Floyd is mortified by. Real Floyd is extremely upset that his brother views him in this way, but Jade kinda just laughs it off. And throughout the whole dream ordeal, Jade is the one taking care of his compatriots. He is the one they have to rely on. He is the one that they look up to. And it feels exceptionally condescending. That word, condescending, I think sums up the majority of Jade's internal world, and I just feel unnerved by it. So he's getting full marks here, 13 points. which means that Jade will be taking home a whopping 30 spooky points. Next up is Floyd and his special magic, Bind the Heart, a spell that redirects or reflects any spell fired off at him if he's in the mood to use this special magic effectively. Since I am someone who does not have magic, this spell means nothing to me because there is no situation in which it would directly threaten me. What it might do is indirectly threaten me if Floyd can't be bothered to reroute the energy properly and a fireball reflects off of him and into my face. For this potential scenario, I have given Floyd a 3. In universe, this ability does make him really annoying to deal with, but if you manage to throw him off his groove or bore him enough during the fight, you'll likely stand a chance against it, and realistically, it's not exactly threatening. The nature of the ability is defensive, and while it can be used offensively, it wouldn't be that much different than dealing with any other form of magic if you were a magic user, so it's still a 3. Outwardly, Floyd is bold, brash, and unpredictable in a sense, acting whenever the mood strikes him and doing whatever he's in the mood to do. I kind of forgot to talk about how tall the twins are in Jade's section, as well as the pointy teeth. But even with them having this intimidating stature, my thoughts on Jade don't exactly change. However, my thoughts on Floyd kinda do. If you joked around with Floyd and told him to bite you, he 100% would do it, no hesitation. He squeezes the breath out of people for fun. He scares people for fun. He breaks bones for fun. He is a menace in every sense of the world, and his seemingly unpredictable mood swings make him just that more dangerous. But he does have a boon in that he's a bit more extroverted and a bit more playful, which can take the edge off of his gangster nature. Plus, Floyd on the whole is much more upfront with his intentions, even if those intentions flip haphazardly. So while his stature is intimidating, his mood's ever-changing, and with a propensity for squeezing, he isn't blindsiding you with these things. Floyd is very upfront with almost everything, and once you spend enough time around him, you can begin to pick up on his patterns. All that said though, Floyd will not sit back and let you get away with anything, and if you happen to look at him wrong at the wrong time of day, you'd likely end up in the infirmary. Jade may be a psychological threat, but Floyd is absolutely a physical threat, so he's getting an extra point for that here, bringing his score for this section up to a 9. The internal motivation of a Floyd, I think, is just chaos. His actions are very impacted by mood, and that's something which fluctuates quite a bit, so it's hard to pin down a specific motivation for his actions most of the time, as he often just regards the action as fun. But fun when it comes to Floyd is a blanket term. What I can say for certain is that Floyd also has a sadistic side, which comes out to play when he's bored, but it's not always explicitly malicious or condescending like Jade. Instead, he wants to see you squirm to see you squirm. It is really that simple. He wants to thrash the puppets because he wants to thrash the puppets. He wants to fight Jamil because he wants to fight Jamil. It is not a deep-seated desire. It is not a need to put himself above a situation. It is not a need to prove anything to anyone that Floyd is operating on. It is literally that he is just in the mood for that action at that time, and he's damning the consequences. This, in theory, might make him a little less scary than Jade to some, but to me, it makes him just about as terrifying. It's almost scarier for Floyd to not have a solid motive behind his actions than for Jade's careful condescension. Personally, I like having things defined, and while some chaos is good, Floyd's level is something else entirely. Sure, I can see patterns in Floyd's behavior, but they don't always apply, which makes him delightful and fresh, but also someone who I'd struggle dealing with on principle. If my ability to choose is threatened because Floyd simply won't take no for an answer and he's in the mood to chase me around the school, I don't think that I would do all that well. So while his motivations are his own puzzle to sort, I still think they're worthy of a 13 here. Bringing Floyd to the grand total of 25 spooky points. Jamil now, his special magic snake charmer is just straight up mind control. It is a 13. I don't think I have to explain this really. Honestly, it is just terrifying. Where Jade had to break you down mentally for his spell to take effect, Jamil just has to stare at you for a little bit, and even the most guarded minds, like Azul, will fall. I cannot do anything against this. I have no control of what I'm saying, doing, or what. It is non-negotiable. It's just gonna happen, and I don't like that. No thank you. I do not want to lose my autonomy today. Thank you very much. Moving along. Outwardly, Jamil is just a dude trying to get by, and I don't think any of his actions outside of the book 4 plot are all that creepy. He's very practiced and he has a lot of talents, but for his and his family's survival, he's had to stifle these actions, so sometimes Jamil comes across as just doing his best by design. He's there to do a job, and his forced humility can be easily overlooked. This is very important for his survival as a servant of the Alasim household, and isn't something I can really fault him for either, given those circumstances. Even in classes, he tries not to draw too much attention to himself, but he sometimes does it so perfectly that you can't help but feel that something is off. The one thing that I do think is explicitly scary about Jamil's demeanor is his stare. Every once in a while, you get that "are you kidding me" 1,000-mile stare, or that "how dare you" panicked expression that are a little scary in their own ways. But I think that they're only spooky because of the associated emotions behind them, not because of the actual expressions themselves. That's kind of it though. I don't really know what else to say about him. He's a dude that sometimes gives you an unnerving look, but otherwise he's just a dude. But I'm still gonna give him 4 spooky points. I don't know. Internally, a lot of Jamil's actions are fueled by resentment with a sprinkle of superiority, and as I have talked about a few times before, resentment is something that I steer clear of no matter the day or hour. Once you add superiority on top of that, it's game over. The only benefit here, I think, is that the resentment is entirely focused on Kaleem, so as long as you are not Kaleem or not overly indulging Kaleem, you'd likely be saved the worst part of his resentment. Even still, this aspect of Jamil bleeds into everything else that he does, and because he's so restricted by Kaleem, even smaller things like Beans Day become all about Kaleem in an effort from Jamil to prove his own worth and step out of Kaleem's shadow. It is not healthy at all, and while I do understand where it comes from and the complexity of the dynamic between these two characters, I'm still a bit scared of this aspect of Jamil. I think the resentment also feeds into some sort of superiority complex, or perhaps it's the other way around. The superiority complex feeds the resentment. I'm not sure. But in either case, Jamil sees himself as above most folks, especially Kaleem, which can lead to him taking actions similar to, say, Jade. Now we know how scary that guy is. Jamil's kind of up there, but not quite fully, so I'm going to give him a 10 here instead, bringing Jamil up to the grand total of 25 spooky points. Vil Schoenheit, world-class model, actor, superstar, the fairest of all, which just so happens to be the name of his special magic. A spell that can cause any substance to take on extra properties. For example, a slice of cake can now also induce paralysis. A bottle of apple juice now contains a lethal poison, or even a regular old cleanser suddenly gaining an acidity that rivals Grimm's stomach acid. The possibilities are truly endless, although if you catch Vil at the wrong time, the possibilities might possibly end you. While I don't think murder is high on his list of actions to take at this particular moment, it was at one point, and with a spell like this, it'd be all too easy to do. Even just the thought of that innocuous slice of cake or apple being used in such a sinister way seems a bit despicable, no? It's a crime against food and humanity both, I say. But realistically, this spell is only as dangerous as Vil decides to be, and given his current trajectory, it's unlikely to harm anyone in a serious matter. However, the potential is still there. So for it, I shall award him 10 spooky points. From an outward demeanor perspective, it really depends on who you are, because if you're a fan or the press, you're going to have a wildly different interpretation of Vil than, say, Apple. So for this section, I went with how intimidated or not I specifically would feel if I was in a room with Vil at the same time, and due to that, he's getting 9 spooky points. I am irrationally afraid of this guy because he is too perfect, too graceful, too beautiful, and it is so intimidating. This is also part of the reason that he gets typecasted as a villain, unfortunately. We can hear some folks chitter-chattering behind his back about how otherworldly Vil is and how unapproachable that makes him. I fear this is something that most celebrities have to deal with, regardless of their conventional beauty, because once you get put on a pedestal of stardom, you are often then placed in a other box or an otherworldly box, or you are placed above humanity in some sort of way, which can make it hard to interact with non-celebrity people. And I hate to put Vil in similar shoes, but I just can't help it. My mind would blank immediately if I ended up meeting him. I just don't know what I would do at all in that scenario. I'd just be a blue screen. That's what would happen. That would be my fate. To me, it's not because he's a celebrity specifically. It's just because he's so perfect. Even though I know underneath the glitz and glamour, he's just a normal kid, I don't think I would be able to realize that thought in the moment, and I would just be too scared to do or say anything of import, so a 9 it is here. Internally, Vil is powered by becoming the best, and he does everything within his power to pursue this goal. It is a quality that I greatly admire him for, and it is something that doesn't rely on or impact others directly. It's not because of Nej that Vil strives to be the best. He's really not trying to prove that he's better than others. He just wants to be the best because he wants to be the best. It is that simple. There are times where his frustrations with others' perceptions does get to him. After all, how can you not see how much work he's put in? How could you claim that someone who doesn't even try is better than someone who puts their whole being into their craft, right? So while Vil is intimidating outwardly, I find his inner motivations completely and utterly non-threatening. He's the definition of loving the game. He is in it for the thrill, and it matters not what anybody else says. Even when he's turned into a raisin, he's mostly concerned with the talent he didn't get to showcase, not his physical state. It's not, oh no, I have wrinkles. It's, oh no, I'll never get to play a middle-aged man. And that's worthy of respect. So much so that he's only going to get one singular point for the terror that is his inner motivations. Therefore, the superstar is getting the grand total of 20 spooky points here. Rook Hunt, where do I begin with you? Probably with Aerofar, but I really don't want to remember that the spell exists. Although, on this note, I would like to express my gratitude for Rook understanding consent extremely well and not pushing too many boundaries when it comes to his pursuit of beauty. That is something I do have to give him credit for. I think that also applies to his signature spell, which allows Rook to find whomever he casted it on, no matter where they are in the world. You cannot run from the spell, you cannot hide from the spell, and it's seemingly innocuous because the ferrymen never even picked up that Rook had cast it on them, which makes the use of this spell extremely terrifying. If Rook had a malicious bone in his body, or perhaps didn't quite get consent as well as he does, he'd be able to find you no matter how desperately you tried to flee. While this is practical for a huntsman in the traditional context of finding the deer that you got, it's not so great when it gets applied to people, at least in the mundane. Of course, life or death situations require a bit more finesse and have a little bit more grace, but given the potential of the spell in the everyday, particularly against someone like myself who has no magic with which to dispel it, I am shaking in my boots. 13 out of 13, full marks, beauté. Now, what could be scarier than someone who can find you no matter where you are in the world? The same person, but with so much charisma, they can make you almost immediately forget that they just broke into your room at 3 in the morning. That is exceptionally terrifying. Rook, for all intents and purposes, never comes off as overtly malicious, and I doubt there is any malice to be found in him either. Throughout multiple events and even the main story, Rook tries to consider others' perspectives and actively hopes for the successful growth of multiple individuals. He's very chill with everyone on the cast, even if certain individuals do not care for him, so all around you would think that he'd be rather wholesome, right? But he's got a few bad habits, like stalking and shooting arrows at people that do make him dangerous. Jade might follow you around to gather information for a plot, but Rook's going to do it for the thrill of the game. Plus, Rook's going to make you forget that he was ever a threat with his flowery language and poetic psalms. The actions Rook takes are spooky, but I think his charisma is even more concerning. I know for a fact that he'd be able to smoothly derail any suspicions I had against him regardless of his actions. A mysterious red substance on the floor? Oh, don't worry, trickster, that's just some experimental residue. Say, would you like to come to the science club sometime? Rook could have a literal corpse behind him and he'd convince me to write it off as a theater prop in a heartbeat. I would fall for that 100% of the time, so he's getting 12 spooky points here. One minor point subtraction for not being inherently malicious like some other folks, but otherwise, almost full marks. The inner machinations of a Rook, however, are something I'm still not fully sure I understand. I know that Rook does his best to observe beauty, to be a consumer of it, but to not tread on it or force his beliefs of beauty onto the observee. And that's nice and all, but he also allegedly takes creepy candids of people and shoots arrows at them, so like, what is the thought process in all of this, bud? I'm just gonna give him a 3 because my brain doesn't fully understand what makes Rook tick. His special magic is very dangerous, his stalking is unnerving, his charisma is diabolically good, and he just doesn't seem inherently malicious, and I don't know how to put my finger on it. Eccentric, sure, but that's not a crime. Neither is being passionate, for that matter. Bro's just vibing on his own frequency, and I think that can scare people, myself included, but it's not enough of a justification to rank him highly, at least in this specific category. So when all is said and done, Rook is getting 26 total spooky points. Malleus Draconia, Mr. Fey of Malevolence himself. While I love a good nap, I do not appreciate my entire sense of reality shattering ad infinitum. Without Silver and the Dream Team, no matter how many times you try to wake yourself up in under this spell, you'd end up whisked back into sleep, going deeper and deeper into the darkness with no way to escape. That sounds like a nightmare in and of itself, not to mention the potential physical side effects of being asleep for thousands of years. All life is meant to be a struggle. That's kind of how life works. So to have that aspect removed entirely and to have your mind completely at its own mercy to continuously provide stimulation, eventually you're gonna end up running out of stuff like poor Floyd did. This spell is just such a wild concept that sparks so many philosophical questions and maybe an existential crisis or two. But no matter how you spin it, it's just scary. So Malleus gets himself a full 13 points here. Outwardly, though, this guy is not a threat in the slightest. He is tall. That's it. He's a tall guy with some horns. Why is everyone so scared of him? I get that he has unfathomable power with which he's done mystifying feats like freeze time and space and reconstruct an entire amphitheater, but as long as he uses that power for good, I don't really see the issue. NRC is a unique environment where most, if not all, of the students attending are fighting for dominance in one way or another. So it does make sense that Malleus would be feared since he checks all of the boxes: physical strength, magical strength, good looks, good voice, etc., etc. But to me, none of that makes him scary. Especially once you find out he's an architecture nerd. Like, at that point, he's just as creepy as a chipmunk. Like, it's really not that hard, guys. The Tweels being tall is kind of intimidating, but when it comes to Malleus, for some reason, I don't even think that it's a problem. It's just a normal height to me. I guess given the reputation that Malleus has on campus, I can throw him a bone or two and give him 3 points here, but realistically, he should be getting 1 at most. Inside, though, I don't think Malleus truly intends to be malicious, but his lack of trying to understand things really rubs me the wrong way, especially when it comes to the consent of living creatures. I won't get too deep into the weeds here, as an upcoming video will further expound upon this in much greater detail, but the fact that he treats humans essentially like objects is terrifying, and this stems from his fundamental lack of understanding. In his mind, his actions are completely justified, because why wouldn't you want to be put to sleep for thousands of years and never have to experience pain or sadness ever again? Why can't you see that this is a gift? Why can't you see that teleporting you from the mirror room to Deisomnia without your knowledge or consent is a bad thing? We do the same thing with magical pens, so what's the big deal, guys? This mindset is what scares me most with Malleus. Outside of it, he's just a big kid who's learning about the world, and I can forgive him to an extent. He's not trying to cause harm, and I think he truly does want to learn, but he's not putting in that effort to actually learn things. And the results are scary, especially with the amount of power that he has. Therefore, he's going to get a 10 here, not because of intentional terror, but because of his weaponized lack of effort, which leaves Malleus with 26 total spooky points. Last but certainly not least is Lilia Vanrouge, our resident vampire-adjacent spooky boy. However, when it comes to his special magic, he's not scary. Far Cry Cradle can read the memories stored in objects, which means that it can be dangerous in terms of uncovering government secrets that were spoken in a room, but similarly to Edia's hacking powers, I personally just cannot be afraid of the spell. Oh no, Lilia's going to use it on my bed and see me bed rotting while reading webtoons. The shock, the horror, whatever will I do? My life really isn't interesting enough for this to be a personal threat, and I'm not at all sure that Lilia's ever used it to enact governmental change. I think my idea of Lilia is very impacted by his cutesy demeanor and grandpa nature, since for most of my twist career, this was the version of him that I interacted with most often. Plus, this special magic manifested after the war when Lilia was already kind of exiled from the Briar Valley's government, so I don't know how much chaos he's been able to get up to with it. I also get the feeling that Lilia isn't very intrusive and only uses the spell when he absolutely needs to, and no alternate form of information gathering potential exists. So all in all, this spell is getting a 1. There was a time where it could have been more devious, but as it stands, it's just not at all scary, especially when compared to the other spells in this list. Outwardly, Lilia used to be super threatening and frightening, but now he's determined to be acute and non-threatening for whatever reason. However, Sebek, Silver, and Malleus all attest that Lilia is still very frightening and terribly scary when he wants to be. I just can't see it. Like, sure, General Lilia was spooky, got that, understand that. But this guy, this grandpa, this little fella, how? How could he possibly be anything other than adorable? Lily is too much of a spectrum in this regard for me to have an articulate, quantifiable answer to his outward demeanor, since it really just depends on when you're encountering him and how you're encountering him. Therefore, I should just go off of the game Lilia, but that would net him 0 points, and General Lilia is spooky, but he doesn't necessarily warrant a full 13. It is precisely because of this dilemma that I have sought counsel in the form of the Wheel, who has decided for us today that Lilia's outward appearance is about a 5 on the spooky scale. So that's how many points he's getting here. Inside, I think Lilia has grown a lot, and his motivations have shifted quite a bit over time. During the war, he was very focused on crushing his foes. Afterwards, he fell into an implied depression, and then he was given renewed purpose in hatching Malleus. After that, he adopted Silver and has tried to instill the ideal of peace in all of the kiddos he's been responsible for. I think Lilia's interior world is one of care and preservation for those he holds dear, and anyone that threatens this peace will be dealt with accordingly. At this point in time, I think he's much more apt to teach folks the errors of their ways with words rather than swords, and I think he does seek to educate more than anything else. But if the mask needs to come all the way off, his words will be as vile as venom and his foes will be met with his strength. His ire is scary, but it only comes to those who merit it, and even in instances like Leona's plot, Lilia is still rather calm, all things considered. There are harsh words exchanged, but in a way they are also kind of meant to serve as a lesson to Leona. In this area, I also got a bit conflicted with what score to give Lilia, because I believe he's really pushed past all of the black and white thinking of his youth into a kind of enlightenment, one that's not malicious or inherently terrifying, but one that can still pack a punch when aptly threatened. So eventually, I decided that 4 points were to be given to this interior world. Therefore, Lilia, perhaps most surprisingly out of the bunch, is only getting 10 total spooky points. But with this, we now have our final tallies for all our spooky boys. So let's see who is the spookiest on campus. In 13th place, we have Lilia. In 12th place, after a lovely little coin flip, we will have Go to Ace, with 11th place being taken by Cater. In 10th place, we have Riddle. In 9th place, we have Vil. In 8th place, we have Leona. In 7th place, we have Trey. In 6th place, we have either Floyd or Jamil, with Floyd taking home the crown of 6th and Jamil taking home the crown of 5th. Malleus is in 4th place, and our top 3 are Azul in 3rd, Rook in 2nd, and Jade in 1st. Congratulations, Jade, on being the spookiest, scariest kiddo on NRC's campus. Your crown and restraining order is rightfully earned. However, there might be some of you lovely viewers who disagree, some who may have their own thoughts on who is and isn't spooky, and if that sounds a bit like you, then let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think Jade deserved to win, or is someone else better suited? Would you too believe anything Brooke says? Or do you think Lilia deserves a chance at redemption? Let me know, but if comments aren't your thing, you could always like and subscribe instead to let me know that you liked the video. Now then, before you go, I just have to remind you that you're amazing and I hope you have a wonderful day.